Hello, hello, hello. I wanted to pass along vibes in another way. As you can tell, there's not music going on right now. I wanted to share a joke with you. I don't want to preface anything. We'll just get right into it. This was passed down to me from my geometry teacher in high school, Mr. Schleiman, who was a very good teacher, and he was an extra in Seinfeld in one episode, and we never could hear the end of it. But that's neither here nor there. Once upon a time, but in recent memory, there was a young boy, and he asked his dad, "Dad, you never talk about your job. What do you do? Are you in like the CIA or the FBI or toppling foreign governments?" And the dad's like, "No, no, 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 no. Actually, my job is a family secret. The people in our family, we do a job called Kushmaker. We are Kushmakers, and if you're lucky, one day I can show you how." And the son is like, "Haha, Kush like weed." And the dad's like, "Haha, no." And so, long story short, the son takes this little bit of wisdom and he stores it in his head until he turns like 16, 17, and he's filling out the Common App for college. And finally, he comes around to his dad and he says, "Hey, can I still do that Kushmaker thing? Like, is that a job? Like," and the dad says, "Yes. What you'll need to do to start is you'll need to study agriculture and forestry in college." The son's like, "All right, yeah, I can do that." The son goes to University of Illinois down in Urbana-Champaign to study agriculture. He gets a master's in like 5 years. And just to brush up on his forestry a bit more, he even takes like a mail correspondence course. They don't have those anymore, but they did back during this joke's time. He takes a correspondence course from the University of Saskatchewan on boreal forests and trees and planting them and that kind of forest care, that kind of thing. And he even works in the forestry service for a couple years after out of college to kind of make some money, try and pay off his debt a bit. But he finally comes to his dad and he's like, his dad hasn't said anything. So he's like, "Dad, you told me to study agriculture and forestry and to know everything there was about trees and plants. And I could tell you, I know about crop rotation. I know about, the difference between perennials and annuals. Clearly, I'm not in like the culture. I'm not in like the agriculture culture. So I have no idea what this is. But the boy knows in the joke, the guy, and he says, "Yo, blah, 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 blah." And I took this correspondence course. Am I ready? Am I a Kushmaker yet? And the dad goes, "Not yet, son. Not yet. Next, you must plant 5 acres of birch trees." The son's like, "Sure, yeah, I'm fresh out of school. I can do that." Much harder than it would seem. He has to buy the 5 acres. Of course, this is land. It's expensive. He ends up like really just working all the time. He lives in this crappy apartment, and he has to like work at like 4 Denny's. He works in like the Four Corners area, like Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona. I'm not good at geography either. And he's doing like 120-hour work weeks to try and save up enough to eventually buy this land and all the saplings he's going to need, birch saplings. And like 5 more years pass in this joke. And finally, like, he does it. He like checks his little like Chase wallet or whatever, his PNC account. He's like, "Oh." And he like looks on Zillow or wherever they sell plots of agricultural land. He goes, "Oh." And he buys all the land. And he plants every single birch tree himself. And he gives them all names. That one's Priscilla, this one's Mindy, that one's Joe, yada yada. And he comes back to his dad and he's like, "Dad, you told me to study agriculture and to know everything there is to know about plants and forestry, and I did. And then you told me to plant 5 acres of birch trees, and I did, Am I a Kushmaker yet?" And the dad goes, "Not yet, son. Not yet. Next, you need to whittle down all of those birch trees to toothpicks." All right, the son leaves there screaming that day because he is furious. He just took all this time and effort. He could have bought all that many toothpicks for so much less, but whatever. He doesn't know what this Kushmaker thing is, so he figures his dad's got to have some sort of reason. And just like that, he's back out there in the soil. Instead of planting his babies, he's killing them. He digs up all the, he chops down all the trees and digs up the trunks, and he's covered in dirt, and the dirt's covered in his sweat, and his sweat's covered in dirt, and he's covered in sap, and yada yada. It's kind of, maybe it's it could be a kind of erotic montage in the movie. And eventually, even he buys a wood chipper to get the size down, but toothpicks are really small. He has to eventually he ends up whittling a lot of these by hand. A Cracker Barrel hires him to sit on the porch and just whittle these toothpicks because it looks kind of like their brand or whatever. But eventually he's got these 5 acres and there's just a mountain of toothpicks right in the center, just a mound. And he goes back to his dad and he's like, you told me to study agriculture, and I did. And you told me to know everything there is to know about plants and forestry and trees and blah, blah, blah. And I did. I know all that stuff back and forward. Then you told me to plant 5 acres of birch trees. And I worked at 4 different Denny's to try and figure out how to make ends meet, to save up for my land. And I did. And I planted 5 acres of birch trees, and they all had names like Mindy and Priscilla and Joe. And finally you told me to make all these toothpicks out of all these trees. Am I a Kushmaker yet, Dad? And his dad says, not yet, son. Not yet. Next, you need to burn all of those toothpicks to ashes. And at this point, the son is kind of fuming, but whatever, right? What worse, how much worse could it get? He burns this huge pile, and it burns for days. We're talking natural disaster levels of just smoke billowing into the air and yeah. But to make a long story short, which is clearly this is intended to be a short story, he ends up with this mountain of ash, just this ominous mountain of ash sitting at the center of his plot of land. And he says, Dad, you told me to study agriculture and forestry and know everything there is to know about plants and forests, and I did. And then you told me to plant 5 acres of birch trees, and I did. And I saved up all this money so I could buy 5 acres of land, and then I could plant all these birch trees. And then I gave them all names like Mindy, Priscilla, and Joe. And then you told me that I had to whittle them all down into toothpicks, and I did. And I made a bunch of toothpicks out of all these birch trees that I gave all these really cute names. And then you told me to burn all of that into ash, and I did. Am I a Kushmaker yet? Is it like Ashmaker? Am I a Kushmaker yet? And the dad goes, not yet, son. Not yet. And the dad reaches into this elaborate, hope chest they have at home. And he pulls out a small metal box that's maybe a foot by a foot by a foot, or in metric, 0.3 meters by 0.3 meters by 0.3 meters. That's wrong, probably. And the dad says, all right, now you have to fit all the ashes into this. And at this point, the son has a minor breakdown. He goes, drinks himself silly. He's losing his, he spends weeks just lost because he has this mountain of ash that you can sled down. And his dad hands him a box like this and says, go for it, kiddo. You got to put them all in here in this metal box. Whatever. He's at the bar one day, really, really sad and dejected. And he sees this guy with crazy, this kind of hair, and that's oh yes, I'm working on a theoretical physics and chemistry paper about space and compounds and things like that. And eventually this vaguely European man and our character from this joke, they get to talking, and he realizes that there's probably an answer in theoretical physics and spatial geometry about how he can indeed fit this mountain of ashes into this small box. He gets his PhD, is the long and short of it. He gets a PhD on top of his master's, and he just studies for years and years and years and years. And he and this physicist go back and forth, and they test it with other types of samples and different boxes and blah, blah, blah. And there's a couple bitter fights, a couple tender romances. I don't know, between the professor and him? Maybe. Between him and someone else? Perhaps. Who knows? And basically, his graduating thesis is a bland 500-page paper that says, mountain of ashes in a 1 foot by 1 foot by 1 foot metal box? More possible than it would seem. And he just goes into all this stuff about the Riemann hypothesis or some math shit. I don't care. And he comes back to his dad. He's freshly wearing his little doctorate medieval scholar little outfit that they all get at graduation. And he's like, Dad, oh my God. And he's holding the box, and he's like, Dad, you told me to study agriculture, you told me to study forestry, you told me to figure out everything to know about growing plants and trees and blah, blah, blah. And I did that, and then you told me to grow 5 acres of birch trees, and I did, and they all had cute little names like Mindy, Priscilla, and Joe. And then you told me to turn them all into toothpicks, and I did, and I had this massive mountain of toothpicks. And you told me to burn that down, and I had this natural disaster on my hands where I'm burning all these toothpicks, and I have a mountain of ashes in my house, or my plot of land. I don't even know where I live. And then you told me to fit all of those ashes into this small box, and he goes, here. They're in there. Am I a Kushmaker yet? And the dad goes, not yet, son. Not yet. You need to become such an adept sailor that you can sail in any conditions. You need to learn how to sail and navigate through any type of river or body of water. I don't care if it's like right around Antarctica or like the most tranquil creek in Mississippi. And the son's kind of gutted because like he keeps having to like learn new things. Ugh, what a drag. And so I'm gonna keep things a little short here, where he does it. You know, he spends another 10 years of his life. The dad is like getting really, really ancient by now, and this guy's already like late 40s, maybe in his 50s, but he can sail like no one sailed before. I also don't know a lot about sailing, but he does, and that's what matters for the joke. And he comes back to his dad and he's like, Dad, you told me to learn everything there is to know about planting plants and forest and agriculture, blah, 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 and I learned how to do all that. And then you told me to plant 5 acres of birch trees, and I did, and blah, 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 blah. And they had cute little names like Minnie, Priscilla, and Joe. And then you told me to turn them all into toothpicks, and I did, and I had this huge mountain of toothpicks, and you told me to burn all that down until I had a mountain of ashes, and then I had a mountain of ashes, and then all of a sudden you told me to fit all those ashes inside of this 1 foot by 1 foot by 1 foot metal box. And I, studied theoretical physics after having a minor breakdown, and some German guy taught me all this stuff. And I wrote my whole thesis on how to do it, and I did it, and here's the box, and then you told me to learn how to sail. And I did. Dad, am I a Kushmaker yet? And the dad goes, not yet, son. So the dad says, you need to find a place in a river that has the highest proportion of thinness to depth, right? So like the deepest possible part of river that's really, really thin. And the son is like, okay, I have somewhere to start because I've been sailing all over the world now like some sort of rich person, like Jeff Bezos or whatever. But he studies some geography. He consults with like, I don't know, David Attenborough probably wouldn't know. Whatever. He consults with smart people and he figures it all out, and he figures out like, technically if we're talking about this kind of depth, blah, 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 freshwater, saltwater, yada, yada, blah, blah, blah. And he goes on these journeys. He's scouting. He's like, oh, this is a tributary of the Nile. This is a tributary of the Amazon, blah, 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 blah. And he eventually finds like a small, it's deceptive. It looks like a stream in Wales. But he finds out that this one little tributary stream thing in Wales has the thinnest to deep ratio, right? The best ratio of how thin it is versus how deep it is. Like it's barely wide enough to fit his boat, but this thing might go down hundreds of feet. Like he can't even find the bottom. He goes back to his dad all excited. He's racking up airfare like wild, by the way. And his dad is like 90. He's like 55. And he's like, Dad, oh my gosh, you told me to study agriculture, and you told me to figure out plants and forests and blah, blah, blah. And you told me to plant 5 acres of birch trees, and I did. And they all had cute little names like Mindy, Priscilla, and Joe. And then you told me to whittle them all down into toothpicks, and I did. And you told me to reduce that mountain of toothpicks to ash, and I did. And I had this huge thing of ash, and you told me to put it in a metal box, and I did. And I studied theoretical physics in order to be able to do it. And you told me how to become a master sailor, and I'm a master sailor. I can sail anywhere and sail anyhow, and blah, blah, blah. And you told me to find this one spot in this one river that would be the best ratio in the entire world of width to depth, and I did. Am I a Kushmaker yet? And the dad goes, nope. The dad's like, now you and I are going to go there together with this box, and we're going to sail to that one spot in that one river. And the son's like, oh my God, finally we're getting somewhere. So he and the dad get in their little sailboat, and they go to this one spot in Wales. They sail all across the ocean. They literally just sail over the ocean. Yada, yada. They go and navigate, and they finally get to the spot. And the son checks, he measures the river and everything. He's like, it's here, Dad, it's here. And the son says, Dad, you told me to study agriculture and forestry, and I did, and I learned everything there was to know about planting plants and trees. And then you told me to plant 5 acres of birch trees. And I worked at 4 different Denny's to finally be able to make enough money, and I gave all of the birch trees names. I raised them like they were my own children, Mindy, Priscilla, Joe. And then you told me to reduce that 5 acres to toothpicks, and I had all these toothpicks. I had splinters in my hands for years. And then you told me to burn all the toothpicks to ash, and I had a pile of ashes, this ominous mountain like Mount Doom. Then you told me to fit all those ashes somehow into this 1 foot by 1 foot by 1 foot box. And I did all this really sophisticated physics and math to figure out how to do that. And then you told me to become a master sailor, and I did. I really, really threw my all into it. I used your sailboat, and I took it everywhere possible. And I was through storms and waves and blah, 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 blah. And then you told me to find this one spot in this one river that would have the best ratio of width to depth. And I did that. I found it. We're sitting over it, and you told me to bring you there. And we're here. Dad, Am I a Kushmaker yet? And the dad says, almost. And the son is like weeping and excited. And the dad's like, now I want you to take that box and I want you to throw it over the side of the sailboat. And the son picks up the box and he's like, oh my God. And he throws the box over the side of the sailboat. Kush. Yeah.